Can people hear me?
Yep.
No, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Manage participants. Okay. Pop this out. And great. Okay, so I guess let's get started. Can you, my screen isn't shared. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes, okay, you can see my screen. I can see the chat window. And I also need to be able to see the participants, but I guess we will deal with that problem when I get to it. And everyone who's getting into the waiting room can just get into the call, right? Is anyone stuck in the waiting room? How do I know if someone's stuck in the waiting room?
I don't think people in the waiting room can hear.
Okay, how to check this? Let me see, if I share my screen and all my controls go away. Okay, to figure out how to share my screen simultaneously and have controls. Okay, participants. Okay. And okay, no one's in the waiting room. Wonderful. So I can actually start. And I don't want this chime, no chime. And now I can share my screen. Share. Great. So thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for those of you who have video on. It's nice to be able to see some people and faces. Can people see my screen? Yes? Okay, great. So today, as I announced, I'm gonna finish up the KKT conditions. And then I wanted to really try and spend a chunk of our class time trying to think about different kinds of modeling problems and different kinds of optimization problems that are actually really important given the current situation. And I wanted to do it through a particular example that we'll talk through and build out from there. So one of the things we talked about at the beginning of the semester was that, optimization is very interesting as a tool, and it's useful mathematically, for example, for solving lots of problems in machine learning or information theory or communications or control and whatnot. But as I mentioned, and I think many of the GSIs also talked about this, is that fundamentally optimization is also just really useful as a way of thinking about problems in real life, right? When you're thinking about, for example, active constraints and inactive constraints, which constraints in your optimization really matter and which ones don't matter is something that is really valuable to understand no matter what kind of problem you're thinking about. And that's just one example of this kind of setup. And so what I wanted to do today was spend the majority of the time really thinking about the modeling part of optimization problems. Usually we do this through, kind of more toy examples, but I wanted to try and do this through some very real world examples in the context of what we're dealing with today. On some logistical notes, the midterm has been graded and we're hoping to release grades tomorrow. We're just doing some final checks. So as a reminder, we made grading bins well in advance of grading. This is not curved. No other student's performance can affect your performance on this test. So, and we are well aware of the fact that the midterm was on the longer side, and this has been, we're thinking about this and we know about this. So we'll do our best to release grades to you as soon as we can, hopefully by tomorrow. Okay.
Professor Renate.
Yes, Alex.
So did you grade my midterm?
Alex, how about we talk about that afterwards in office hours?
Okay, we can talk after.
Okay, great, thank you. One of the suggestions I also got was that I'm going to try this in lecture today, which is that if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll try and call on you to ask the question by voice. If you have questions that come up, please also put them into the chat. Some of them I will try to answer, but others it will be helpful if students can answer each other's questions so that we don't spend a lot of time doing this. Okay, so, okay. Great. So we are now thinking about picking up from last time. Last time we talked about this idea of complementary slackness. And what complementary slackness tells us is that, it tells us basically about the connection between these Lagrange multipliers and actually the constraint. And it says that, if you have a Lagrange multiplier that is non-zero, that's associated with a constraint, then that means that that constraint is actually active. On the other hand, if your constraint is inactive or you have this kind of slack in your constraint, then your Lagrange multiplier is 0. And so what I want to talk about today is what are KKT conditions, which are building basically on this idea of complementary slackness. Complementary slackness is the most interesting one probably, or the most non-trivial of the KKT conditions. And these KKT conditions are particularly useful for solving different kinds of optimization problems. One of these problems that is useful, that KKT conditions can be used to solve, is the famous water filling problem, and we'll come to this in a little bit. And it's also going to be on your homework. But let me tell you a little bit about what these KKT conditions actually are. So everyone can see my screen, right? Everyone can see the notes? Yeah? Okay. So let's consider a optimization problem, not a convex problem, or it can be convex, but it could also be non-convex. Everything I'm saying holds for not necessarily convex problems. So when I say non-convex, I'm not excluding convex problems. I'm just saying that nothing I'm saying depends on convexity. Let's assume that strong duality holds, and let's assume that we're dealing with a differential objective with differentiable constraints, okay? In this case, we can think of these KKT conditions as necessary conditions. And what do I mean by necessary conditions? A necessary condition means that if I have a point x star that is a primal optimal point, and if I have some point lambda star and nu star that are dual optimal points. So what this means is that basically x star solves the minimization of f naught of x subject to constraints. And lambda star and nu star solve the maximization of g of nu, or g of lambda comma nu, right? Subject to whatever constraints there might be. I'm not writing out the full problem. But if x star solves this problem and lambda star and nu star solve these two problems, then they must satisfy the following conditions. And this set of conditions is called the set of KKT conditions. Okay? So this set of conditions is basically, let's walk through them one by one. KKT. Okay? So what are these conditions saying? The first one is saying, I want to have that fi of x star is less than or equal to 0. What does that mean? It just says that, well, you had these constraints. Remember, the primal problem was p star is equal to min over f naught of x, such that fi of x less than or equal to 0 and hi of x is exactly equal to 0. So when I say that x star satisfies fi of x less than or equal to 0, what that means is that, well, x star is primal feasible. Right? There's not really much of much interesting that's being said there. It's saying that, well, if it's the optimal point, it had better be in the domain, otherwise it wouldn't even be optimum. So it's saying fi of x star had better be equal to 0. Similarly, the second one is saying, well, if there's equality constraints, x star had better satisfy those as well, right? Otherwise, how can it be the optimum? The third one is saying, well, you also claimed that this lambda, this lambda and nu, I forgot to draw arrows on these, this x star also has an arrow on it. If lambda is your dual optimal, well, remember when we set up the dual, we have these constraints on lambda. Lambda better be a feasible point for 0. So this is dual feasibility. Okay. Then but hey, remember you just can people not hear me? What to do with this? Yeah, my connection has had issues all day. How do I fix this? Let me try something. Is this true for everybody or for a subset of people? If you're having trouble hearing me, please vote yes. Yeah, about 30 people cannot hear me. This is not good. Maybe I can try turning off my video? Okay, let me try turning off my video and see what happens. See if that helps everything. Okay. Can you hear me now? Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to clear all the votes. If you can hear me, please vote yes. Okay, a lot more people seem to be able to hear me now. Okay, so I'm gonna keep my video off and try not to do any explaining with my hands. Okay, but everyone can still see my screen, correct? Yes, okay, good. Okay, so we were on condition 4 before internet dropped out. So we have now condition 4 that says basically complementary slackness, which is what we proved in the previous lecture, which says that if lambda I star is a dual optimal and fi of x star is basically the constraint that is at this evaluated at this optimum point, then complementary slackness says that lambda I star fi x star must be exactly equal to 0, right? This we proved last time. And then there's the last constraint on the last of the KKT conditions, which has to do with this gradient of the Lagrangian. So what this expression here is basically the gradient with respect to x of the Lagrangian. Okay? Yes, we're assuming strong duality holds. So now we have basically this gradient with respect to x of the Lagrangian, and we're going to say that, well, remember, what is the definition of, how are we thinking about this? If I have some L of x comma lambda star comma nu star, I'm really thinking of what is my x, right? My x is basically the argmin of the max over lambda comma nu of L of x comma lambda comma nu, right? So this expression L of x comma lambda star comma nu star is essentially the maximization filled in, right? So now if I just think of this whole thing is basically equal to L of x lambda star nu star, because x is the only variable, lambda star and nu star are the arguments that maximize this thing. So when I want to say that, okay, well, x star minimizes this, so the gradient with respect to x must be 0 at this point itself. Let me see if I can turn my video on again so that I can actually explain things. How do I do this? Oh, okay. Can you still hear me? Okay, well, please tell me again if you cannot hear me for some reason. Hopefully internet issues will not be a thing. Okay. So what this is saying is that basically if x star is actually the optimum point or for the primal, and lambda star and nu star are actually optimum points for the dual, then every single one of these conditions must be satisfied, right? They're all basically coming from different things. And it's kind of this whole time when we've been talking about duality, we've been building up to this point where if we have these differentiable functions and strong duality holds, we're not even using any kind of convexity here, but we're saying that any point must satisfy these conditions. So remember that this doesn't say that if a point satisfies these conditions, it must be the optimum one. It says that if the point is the optimum, then it must satisfy these conditions, right? So make sure you understand which direction that implication is. That is why these are called necessary conditions. I see a raised hand, Tomas.
Hi. So we know from the first couple conditions that both of the summations are equal to 0, right?
These summations, well, yeah. Here now it's important to note that this summation is no longer lambda I star f by x star. The important thing to see is that there's this gradient in here. So what this equation is actually, this is saying that the gradient of L of x comma lambda star nu star is equal to 0. So this is a really good question. Does everyone see that this is not the Lagrangian, but it's in fact the gradient of the Lagrangian? So we cannot use the earlier equations to say anything about what's happening here. Excellent question.
So we don't know their values at all.
We do not know the value of this thing that I just highlighted with this brace, nor do we know the value of this. Right? We know nu star, but we don't know anything about the gradient. Does that make sense?
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, good question. Thanks for asking. Okay. So I'm sure that many of you in your calculus classes before have solved optimization problems by, just saying, let's take lambda plus the constraint and then differentiate and solve. And effectively what you were doing was you were using these KKT conditions, except that, in high school you weren't earlier classes, whenever you took this material, you weren't in a position yet to be able to actually prove this. Okay. So I'm looking at some of the questions on chat. Do we also know nothing about the gradient of f naught? In general, we don't. Like, we can say things about the gradient of f naught, but when we think about the KKT conditions, that's not always included. We could make other implications, but we don't want to go there. If that's the case, how is the objective not always convex? I'm not sure I understand that question. Remember, strong duality doesn't necessarily imply, like, strong duality can hold even if the things aren't convex, even if the functions aren't convex. Can we say the objective of the primal is convex because it's a pointwise max for a bunch of... I'm going to take that question offline, but in general, we're here not thinking about convexity. Okay. Yeah, I'll talk about that more in detail offline. But right now, remember that we're not thinking anything about the objective function. We don't know whether it's convex or not. Okay, so basically what I want to say is that there's this one-way implication. If lambda star, x star, and nu star are optimal, then they must satisfy these KKT conditions. But it is possible that there are some points that satisfy these conditions and they're not the optimal points, right? It's not saying that only the optimal points satisfy these conditions. It's saying that, you know, if you find the optimal, it had better satisfy these conditions, okay? Okay, I'll pause and take questions. Please raise your hand so that I can see you. Okay, I'll answer this question, or yes, Shankar.
Yeah, I just posted a question. Why is the maximum of the Lagrangian for a fixed x equal to the Lagrangian evaluated at the dual optimum again?
So
The thing that you
remember
circled
that,
on the right, yeah.
so this thing, right? So this basically, remember when we did the min-max theorem?
Yes.
When we did the min-max theorem, we said that basically our P star can be written as the following. Our P star is equal to the min over x of the max over lambda and nu of L of x, lambda, and nu, okay? So now, let's say we have these, so there's two optimization problems here. Optimization, the inside optimization is this optimization, which I'm labeling optimization 1, and the outside optimization problem is this other optimization problem, which I'm labeling optimization 2. Let's say, what order am I going to do these in? I'm going to do the inside one first, and then I'm going to do the outside one. When I do the inside optimization, I know that the optimum points that I'm going to get out are going to be lambda star and nu star, right? Because I know that lambda star and nu star are the dual optimum by my assumption right here. So I know that when I solve this, what I'm going to get out is basically L of x comma lambda star comma nu star. Is that clear?
Oh, okay, yeah, I think so.
And so now when I write, I can therefore write P star is equal to min over x of L of x comma lambda star comma nu star. I get basically this guy, where what I'm seeing is that, in fact, I substitute this inner optimization with its actual value. Because I know now I found the optimal lambda and nu. I don't really anymore how to write it as an optimization of our lambda and nu. I can just substitute the optimal values. Does that help?
Yeah, I think I got it. Thank you.
Great, great. Okay, any other questions? Moses. Moses, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sorry, I typed it in chat, but we'll say if we take a pointwise maximum in that first problem over lambda and nu, doesn't the lambda star and the nu star that we get also depend on x? Because we end up getting a function that's strictly in x, right? So rather than thinking of like lambda star and nu star as being like constant over every value of x, wouldn't it also?
So when I solve for this maximization, right,
yeah.
I can, let's say somehow magically I'm given these optimal values.
Okay.
Like I'm given the lambda star and nu star, that these are the optimizing values. Then I can basically substitute them in. So don't worry about how to compute them necessarily.
Okay.
Other questions? Rohan?
So I'm hung up on the same thing that Moses was. Like sort of in what sense are lambda star and nu star optimal? Because doesn't the optimal lambda star and nu star depend on x, or is it independent of x?
So you have to remember, right, that we have strong duality holds. So P star is equal to D star, which means that the min over x max over lambda comma nu of L of x lambda nu is equal to the max over lambda nu min over x L of x comma lambda comma nu. So because strong duality holds and because these things are interchangeable, right, there's not going to be that dependence. So basically, I can solve this optimization problem first, and I know that even if I was to first do the minimization over x, I'm still going to get the same values. So we're using the fact here that strong duality holds.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Christopher.
So you mentioned necessity. Are you saying that satisfaction of those conditions you laid out, like the inequality constraints, etc., those are necessary for X star to be optimal?
These are necessary conditions for X star to be optimal, yes.
I see. Okay.
They're
And
not
then
sufficient conditions. We're going to get to sufficient conditions
right.
just in the next part.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, other questions? Good. Oh, Arno.
Yeah, can you remind me why the Lagrangian with respect to x must be null if we don't assume that we have a convex objective?
Can you remind me why the Lagrangian with respect to...
either if we assume we have a convex objective, and what implies the other here in your... So you say that x prime minimize the Lagrangian.
Yes.
So we have that the gradient is null.
This Lagrangian is new? No, I'm not sure I'm understanding you.
No, the gradient of the Lagrangian with respect to x is null.
Yes.
Is zero, right?
Is
so
zero, yes.
Why do you have that?
So I'm saying that x star minimizes this quantity here that I'm boxing.
Yes.
Right? So if x minimizes a function.
And we assume it's convex, right?
And we're not assuming that it's convex. However, we know that if x minimizes a function and that function objective is differentiable, then we must have that we are going to have gradient zero of that function. So now if you think of L of x comma lambda star comma nu star just as a function of x, right? Lambda star and nu star are fixed. Right? So this is just a function of x. Every single optimizer must have gradient zero. That doesn't mean it's the unique optimizer, but the global optimizer must also have gradient zero. There might be other local optimum that have gradient zero as well, which is why this is a necessary condition, right? It's not a sufficient condition.
I see.
Does that make sense? Remember, so you can have something that has multiple ups and downs like this, but even at the global minimum, even there's multiple ups and downs, you're still going to have gradient zero at that point.
All right, and I assume that the domain is convex, or I'm not on the border. Why I'm sure I'm not on the border?
So here we're assuming that we're not dealing with a constrained optimization problem, that our domain is for all of Rn, all of the constraints have been dualized.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any last questions? Okay, let's move on to the second part and go from there. Okay, so now I want to think about, basically getting to more of the related to the questions that you're thinking about, which is that now let's look at specifically what happens if your problem itself is actually convex. Okay, so let's say your problem is convex, and you have this differential objective, and let's say you're thinking about the case where basically strong duality holds. You have these HIs that are affine, strong duality, and Slater's condition holds, right? So you have convexity. You can use Slater's condition to infer strong duality. Okay, then you take the exact same KKT conditions, and here I'm writing out these KKT conditions, not for some X star, but I'm saying let X tilde, lambda tilde, X tilde, lambda tilde, and nu tilde be any points that satisfy the KKT conditions, right? Any points that satisfy KKT. Because they're not necessarily optimal. In this case, in the case that you have these special properties, that your problem is convex, the HIs are affine, Slater's condition holds, therefore strong duality holds, then in fact you can infer that X tilde, lambda tilde, and nu tilde are actually optimal points. So when you have these extra things, you can say that these conditions are in fact necessary and sufficient. So is everyone clear on the difference between a necessary condition and a sufficient condition? I'm gonna tell me if you understand the difference between so the necessary condition means that if X is optimal, then it must satisfy the conditions. Sufficient condition means if you satisfy the conditions, then you must be optimal. The implication is in two different ways. So I'm going to pause and make sure that people understand this difference. If you don't understand it, say no, or ask a question. If you understand it, say yes. Okay, the majority of the class is not voting, which is not helpful. Okay, can I say it one more time? Let me write it out. Okay. If conditions imply X star is optimal, these conditions are called sufficient conditions. If X star optimal implies conditions, these conditions are called necessary conditions. Okay, now how many people are clear on the difference between necessary and sufficient conditions? Like one says, if the condition implies optimality, that's a sufficient condition. If X being optimal implies the condition, that's a necessary condition. Are there any questions about this? Any raised hands? Okay, can I move on? Yes? Okay, I have only 10% of the class voting. Okay, 40%, 50%. Okay, good. I will move on then. Okay. If you're unclear about this, please ask me afterwards, because it's important to understand these directions of implications. But let's see why this is true, right? So let's now let's infer from the KKT conditions that in fact this X tilde, lambda tilde, and nu tilde must be optimal. Okay? So now let's consider the following. Consider this L of X, lambda tilde, nu tilde. Here, lambda tilde and nu tilde are fixed. So now this is a function of X. Okay? Now, if we know that F naught is convex, we know that the Fi's are convex, and we know that the HI's are affine. Right? So if now we think about L of x comma lambda twiddle comma nu twiddle, this whole function must be convex, right? Why is it convex? Because F naught of x is convex. I'm adding to it a sum of convex functions. And remember, I'm multiplying these convex functions by a positive number. So, you know, if I'm not inverting the shape of any function, right? Any function that is U-shaped stays U-shaped when it's multiplied by lambda, right? And now I had these new i's times hi of x, but these hi's are affine in x, right? So affine functions are also convex. So I just have these sums of convex things. So L of x comma lambda tilde comma nu tilde is also a convex function, right? So now if it's a convex function and I take its gradient, right? Then, well, you know, and that gradient is 0, then we know that for a convex function, x tilde must be the minimum point, right? So if I can find this point x tilde such that this gradient is actually 0, then I must actually be at this minimum point. So, okay, so now let's consider this, you know, g of lambda twiddle nu twiddle, which is this min over x of L of x comma lambda twiddle comma nu twiddle, okay? So I know what the minimizer of this is. I know that the minimizer of this is in fact this x twiddle, right? Why? Because I know that it satisfies the KKT conditions, right? I know that gradient of L of x comma lambda twiddle comma nu twiddle with respect to x at the point x equal to x twiddle, I know that this gradient is equal to 0. This implies that x twiddle is a minimizer of this L function, right? In fact, it's not a minimizer, it is the minimizer because we know L is a convex function of x, right? So I basically can write that this min over x is actually this L evaluated at this x twiddle itself. Everyone with me here? Can I just get a vote to see if everyone's with me at this point? I'll pause and take a question, since I'm not sure I have everyone. Yes. Wade?
Yeah, could you just repeat that, like a brief summarized version really quickly?
Sure. So remember, what do we know? We know now that the KKT conditions are satisfied, right? So we know that x twiddle satisfies this equation. What is this equation? This equation says that the gradient of L of x lambda twiddle nu twiddle evaluated at the point x is equal to x twiddle, this gradient is equal to 0, right?
Yep.
L is a convex function. If I take its gradient and I find where it's 0, then what must I get? I must get the minimizer.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank
right? Mm-hmm. So that's all I'm saying here, nothing more fancy than that. The KKT conditions are basically telling me that I can write this equality. Now let me just write this out in a little bit of long form. So this L of x twiddle lambda twiddle nu twiddle is now just writing it out. I can write it as f naught of x twiddle plus the sum of lambda I fi plus nu I hi, right? But now if I look at the second term here, I also have from the KKT conditions that complementary slackness holds. Right? I have this complementary slackness here. So complementary slackness tells me that this term is exactly identically equal to 0. And I know x tilde is a feasible point. So from this condition, I know that this last term is exactly 0 as well. So I now get that this g of lambda twiddle nu twiddle is exactly equal to f naught of x twiddle, right? So now I have found you an x twiddle. Basically, what did this argument just show? It said that if x twiddle, lambda twiddle, and nu twiddle satisfy the KKT conditions, then they have 0 duality gap, which means that you have this, you know, wherever your f naught of x twiddle is, remember, our g is always a lower bound for f, right? So f is somewhere here, g is a lower bound. And now I found these 2 points where these are exactly the same. So if g is a lower bound for every single primal value, and I found a point where they're exactly the same, so that means that they must actually be, like x tilde must actually be the optimum point. Because every single thing is lower bounded by this function. So because they have 0 duality gap, I must therefore be able to infer that x twiddle is actually the optimum. Questions? Tomas?
So I think I kind of understand this, but if you ask me to do the proof between the sufficiency version versus the necessary version, I'm not sure I could really tell them apart. So I was wondering if you could kind of outline the differences.
So remember, where did we start? The assumptions were different, right? In the necessary case, we assumed the proof hinged on the fact, we assumed that x star, nu star, lambda star were optimal and derived the conditions, right? We said, let these be optimal. We said, let these be optimal. Then we proved that each one of these must be true, right? And we didn't do that proof here. Most of the proof, in fact, the hardest part of this proof was showing that complementary slackness is true. And we proved that last lecture.
Okay, yeah.
Here, on the other hand, so here basically we didn't really do much of a proof. We just said, oh, by the way, we've been working really hard and we've already proved all of this.
Right.
On the other hand, for the sufficient conditions, we said, let's say we were magically given some oracle waved a wand and gave us x tilde, nu tilde, and lambda tilde that satisfied these conditions. Okay? If I somehow magically found these guys, then I use these conditions to infer that, in fact, x tilde must be optimal.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Shin?
Hello. So
Yeah.
For the g for the equation in the g lambda tilde mu tilde equal to minimum x l x lambda tilde. So the equation between the minimum x to the l x tilde lambda tilde v tilde is caused by the x tilde lambda tilde nu tilde satisfy the KKT condition.
In particular, it has satisfied the last KKT condition. It comes because of this statement. This exact statement here implies this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Wade, have you had your hand up, or is that from before?
No, this is from before.
That's from before, sorry.
Okay. Catherine?
Why do we have to assume that H was affine?
Why did we have to assume that H was affine? It was because we wanted to have strong duality hold, and we assumed and we wanted Slater's condition to hold.
Okay.
So we want to basically have, we want to be able to use the fact that L is convex. So that's where we're using the affineness of H.
Does that come from Slater's condition, or?
So Slater's condition, basically, if you have affine H's, then Slater's condition is easy to check.
Okay.
Basically, as long as you have a non-empty domain, you're set. Whereas
Okay.
if H are not affine, then you have to do a lot more work.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, I don't. So is this a proof for the sufficiency of the KKT conditions for the optimality of X, lambda, and nu? Yes, exactly. That is exactly a proof for the sufficiency. What did we just show? We said that if KKT true, if these conditions hold, then X tilde, lambda twiddle, nu tilde must be optimal, right? So this implication, the direction of the arrow is this way. If and only if conditions, when you say a condition is if and only if, you're saying that it's necessary and it's sufficient. Okay, cool. So I wanted to kind of pause here and try and spend the rest of the class in this brainstorming session. I guess this part took longer than I expected, but what I wanted to talk about was, really thinking about optimization problems as a modeling tool and thinking about how we can really use our collective power as a class to possibly have an impact on what is currently going on right now. We're a group of people that have a bunch of technical skills. We're all studying optimization. And in the current environment, we do have a lot of hard trade-offs to make. I mean, I was looking at some of the responses to the class survey that was sent out. There's actually a lot of people who haven't responded. I would love to hear more. And I know that a lot of you are, making very hard decisions and are in stressful situations regarding being caregivers for other family members and other friends, taking care of other people, and there's a lot going on. And optimization is something I think that it comes up and is very, can be very useful for modeling these different kinds of problems that are showing up right now. So what I wanted to walk through was a simple optimization that is set up in this paper, Abebe et al. I linked it on the Piazza post. And it's a model for trying to understand income shocks in an economy. And it's trying to understand if a government wanted to try and make things better in some way by giving subsidies to people, for example, that like is being discussed in the current administration. How can this be done in a way that maximizes the social good? So here, what this model is saying is saying, let's say you have n agents, and each agent I want to think of as basically a family. And let's say each of these agents has some steady income per unit time, which means that every day or every month, they're making CI amount of money. And when I say they're making CI amount of money, I want to model this as basically, it's the, every day, let's say you make some amount of money, or every month you make some amount of money, but you also have some expenses, right? You pay your rent, you have to buy food, you have other bills that you have to pay. So your income is basically what you earn minus your expenses. So that's what I want to call income. And let's say I have an initial reserve, like I have this initial wealth that I start out with. Now in this case, if I think about this agent going over time, T is on my x-axis here, I can plot the wealth of this agent basically as a straight line, right? I start out with my initial reserve UI, and I get CI more wealth with unit time. So I basically have this line with a positive slope, right? Everyone understand my model here? I'm trying to make a very, very stylized model. It's extremely oversimplified, right? But it's trying to get at the essence of the problem. Now we want to try and model what might happen to such a family in the presence of what is called an income shock. What's an income shock? An income shock is something that causes a sudden expense. Maybe, you know, it's a sudden loss of a job. Maybe you get sick. Maybe there's, you know, there's an unfortunate car accident or something, and you have to pay a bill for that, or you get a parking ticket. Something that, you know, you're going up, your income is increasing, but suddenly you hit this shock. Something happens. You know, you're going up, you hit a shock, and your income, or basically your net wealth, decreases because of it. And again, to do this in a stylized way, let's say each agent I experiences a shock with expectation mu I. So at time, you know, every time I get a shock, I know that the expected value of that shock is some value mu. And let's say in every unit of time, let's say this unit of time is a month or whatever it is, there are beta I shocks. And beta I might be greater than 1, it might be less than 1, right? It might be that I get 1 shock every 2 months, in which case beta would be a half. It may be I get 2 shocks every month, in which case beta would be 2, right? So okay, so this is the basic model. And if now, let's say on a per unit time, right? If I want to have this positive slope, how am I going to have a positive slope? Well, you know, first here, if CI is positive, then I'll have this positive slope. But now if I think about on average, if I think about the slope of this on average, this is basically a random walk. If I think about this on average, I'm basically growing at this rate. You know, I'm going up on average by CI every unit time, and I'm going down on average by beta I times mu I, right? Because I'm getting beta I shocks, and each of those shocks costs me mu I, okay? So is everyone with me on this kind of basic model of what's happening on average? Any questions? Okay, good. So if this, you know, CI minus beta I mu I was negative, then basically, I'm basically going to on average go down, right? And on average, I'm going negative, which means I'm going to basically eventually hit 0, right? With probability 1, I'm going to hit income 0, or not income 0, but kind of, I'm going to hit having 0 wealth. And 0, we're deciding as this arbitrary threshold. But basically, what you want to avoid is what economists call ruin. And ruin is the situation where suddenly your income drops so low because of a variety of shocks that, oh, you can't afford to pay rent, or you cannot pay your next hospital bill, or you cannot buy the medication that is needed for your condition to make you be able to work. And if you hit ruin, what happens is that you might end up in this negative spiral of, well, if you, let's say you cannot pay your rent, you are therefore evicted from your house, therefore you cannot go to your job, you know, one thing leads to another. So a lot of what is called ruin theory is focused on how can we avoid people from having ruin. You know, everyone is going to experience different kinds of shocks, different kinds of things are going to happen in their lives. How do we prevent something really bad from happening? So what one can do is that you can compute what is called the probability of ruin. And this is basically the probability that a random walk, let's say that starts at some point ui, has this upward drift and this downward drift, and the total drift is basically given by the Ci minus beta I mu I, what is the probability that you hit 0? And 0 is the threshold that we're saying that if you hit 0, then something really bad is going to happen, and you might end up in this, bad spiral. So what we want to do, let's say we're now policymakers, we're planners. We want to be able to support people as much as possible. We could give everyone a uniform subsidy, right? We could say, here's $1,000 for every person. That's one way of giving a subsidy. But maybe there's a better way of giving a subsidy that says that I want to, in fact, help the people more who need it the most, right? So there are people who, for example, in our current situation, are more affected and less affected. For example, my job is not that affected by what's going on, right? I'm still getting my paycheck despite what is going on. But we're hearing that businesses, smaller businesses are having to sometimes close their shutters because everyone is sheltering in place and there's nothing we can do about it. So, maybe a person like me doesn't need this subsidy at this moment because my income, my paycheck is still coming in, but maybe there's someone else who needs this more. In this case, what you can do is you can actually compute exactly for this model what is called the probability of ruin. And this probability of ruins has a surprisingly simple expression. We don't have all the tools in this class to derive exactly this expression, but trust me that this is exactly how this works out. And you can use the theory of random walks. You can take courses like 226A if you wanted to really understand this. A good question, is this independent of initial wealth? This assumption, I think this assumes that your UI is exactly 0. You start out at 0 and you want to see what's the probability that you're going to hit 0 again. But you can also build up this model to think about, it's not hard to generalize. It's the case that you start out with some initial wealth. Let's think of this case that you start out at 0 as well. So now what I want to say is that, let's say I have this, probability of ruin. Instead of, let's say, having income Ci at every time, what if I could give everyone a little bit of money at every time interval? So instead of having their income be Ci, their income is in fact Ci plus Xi. So they have this little bit of a bump in their income. Then their probability of ruin goes down, right? Because the denominator increases, so the probability of ruin goes down, right? Now I have these subsidies that I can give. I can give out certain amounts of money to different people, but I have a budget constraint. I don't have infinite money. Let's say I have B dollars that I can give out. And I want to now distribute this money, BI, or I want to give Xi to every single person such that the sum of the money that I give out is upper bounded by my budget B. But I want to minimize the total probability of ruin for everyone. So this expression here is basically the sum of the probability of ruin for all agents I. This is now an optimization problem. It is an optimization problem that happens to be particularly nice because its constraints are linear, right? In fact, they're affine. Actually, no, sorry, they're just linear. They're not even affine. They're just linear constraints. And we know that, in fact, in this case, that the optimal point will be hit by exactly equality. So this inequality can, in fact, be made into an equality as well. Turns out that this particular optimization problem is an example of an optimization problem that has been studied in the past. And this is called the water filling optimization problem. And you're going to see an example of this water filling problem in your homework. It's also worked out in the Boyd textbook very clearly. So water filling, basically, a water filling solution is this optimization problem, and you're given, basically, it allows you to have an algorithm by which you can actually compute the best income, the best way of distributing the income to different people. Water filling means that basically what you want to do is you want to, let's say you have a pond and you have different rocks at the bottom at different levels. Water filling says that, well, when you pour water into this, do I have anything here? Okay, I have a water bottle here, right? And let's say there was like a big rock here in the bottom of this water bottle, like this part. And I poured water into this water bottle. Water would not get on top of this rock first. Right? It would get, like, it would fill up here first, and then it would fill on top of this rock. Is everyone seeing that? So a water filling solution basically says, like, pour money where the water is. Basically that says that give the least best off person money first, get them up to the level of the next best off person, then distribute money equally among those people, then get them up to the level of the third best off person, then distribute money equally among those people, and so on and so forth. This is what is called a water filling solution. So, you know, I'm not going to go into the proof of why this is true. I've linked the paper for those of you who would like to read this more. On your homework, you're going to do an example of a very, very similar problem. But what I wanted to do collectively as a class for the next 20 minutes, however much time we have, was use this basically problem as an inspiration for thinking about other optimization problems that, you know, might be relevant right now. So are there any questions first about this? I can take a question or two. Anyone want a question? Yeah, Rohan?
I just had two quick things I wanted to clarify. So, like, our subsidy budget, is that like per unit time as well? Or do we just change well?
Good question. Let's say we just have, we can allocate things for, we have one entire year, and we can allocate, you know, we have a fixed time horizon for which we're going to continue giving subsidies.
And then, like, the shocks, like, is that expression we derive dependent on some specific distribution for the, like,
it assumes a Poisson distribution, but, you know, I don't want to really get into the details of that, but it's yeah, the underlying model is a Poisson distribution of shocks.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, my goal here, I don't really want to, like, my goal is not to focus on the details of the modeling, but the goal is to focus on the spirit of the problem, right? This does use a little bit of tools from probability that we haven't necessarily talked about in this class, and I know that not everyone has taken 126, which is why I don't want to delve too much into the probability parts of this. But basically, as long as you get the model that, okay, you have some basic study income that you're getting every so often, and then sometimes you have these expenses that show up randomly. They're random magnitude and they come at random intervals. What you want to avoid is some series of shocks that basically sends you under. Okay? And turns out this paper by Reddy et Abebe and her co-authors shows that water filling is actually an optimal way of allocating subsidies. And this is something that is different from how subsidy allocation is currently done. They don't think about shocks in particular as a way of, they don't take, like, a lot of subsidies that are allocated currently don't take shocks as a parameter into account when they're doing these allocations. And so perhaps this kind of modeling can actually lead to a more efficient way of allocating these things. But I was reading this paper and listening to this talk, and it just basically got me thinking that there's a lot of similar optimization problems that people around us and policymakers are currently facing. And I know that, you know, it's a stressful time for everyone here, and I don't want to necessarily bring that, but I thought that we could basically try and, you know, channel some of the stress in some useful directions. So for example, a lot of the progress on linear programs, for example, the simplex algorithm by George Danzig, came from resource allocation problems that came about during the World War, right? So LPs, and why there's such a big theory around being able to solve LPs is because in the war efforts, we really needed to be able to optimize our spending and our efforts. But I'm thinking that there's a lot of problems in our general society right now that we can also think about modeling. So for example, let's say you're a small business. Let's say you're a restaurant owner. I have some friends here in Berkeley, for example, who own a restaurant, and they have a certain set of expenses. They have to pay their staff salary, they have to pay their bills, they have to pay their rent. And currently, a lot of restaurants are allowed to do takeout only. Their revenue has dropped quite significantly. So there's some expectation by which they're getting income. But let's say you wanted to give them the minimum subsidy that would allow them to stay afloat but not go under. How could you write this as an optimization problem, right? For example, as one situation. Another example is that, let's say you're a city planner. You're trying to figure out whether or not you want to issue a shelter-in-place order to your city. In this case, you want to trade off between, you need some people who are essential workers who are going to be going out. You want to make sure that in case some of those essential workers get sick, you have enough hospital beds for them. So you have a constraint that the expected number of people who are sick should be less than or equal to the number of hospital beds. You want to minimize the probability that the total number of sick people is, you want to have that be below something. At the same time, you want to make sure that your economy does not completely crash. Are there strategies by which you can say, well, we're going to have partial lockdown? How do you decide which people can and should go to work to make sure that the economy keeps up? Which are the people who can and should maybe stay at home? How do you decide how to issue these particular orders? I mean, these kinds of optimization problems come up when you're thinking about taxation. They come about when you're thinking about, there's like, if you increase taxation, you get more revenue, but that might also lead to fewer jobs. Again, you can formulate this as an optimization problem. These infections that we are thinking about, infections can be modeled using there's a set of dynamical equations that actually can model epidemics. So you can model what is called the SIR model. So it's called susceptible, infected, recovered model, which says that there's a rate at which someone who is infected might infect someone else. People who are susceptible might get infected. People who are recovered are immune and therefore no longer get the disease. Under this model, what fraction of people should you ask to stay at home? What fraction of people should you allow to work so that you can actually maximize, let's say the productivity of the society while minimize the long-term bad effects while actually making sure that not too many people get sick and there's enough hospital beds for everyone. Things about distribution of testing kits, things about how to do group testing. For those of you who are taken 126, maybe you've heard of group testing. But anyway, there's a ton of different optimization problems around this. And what I wanted to do, I know we're a little bit low on time. I was hoping to have a little bit more time for this, but I would love for us to put together a document of what are the optimization problems that maybe we can try and tackle. Maybe I'm open to, having some of the project ideas. We have a series of projects that we're hoping to announce after spring break, but in light of everything, maybe we can have a project or two that's focused on trying to, deal with the current situation. So what I was thinking was that in the 15 minutes that I have left, we could spend a little bit of time where you guys can get to talk to each other in breakout rooms, and then we can come back together and see if there are some ideas that we might actually want to try and formalize as a group, to see where how we can actually use optimization theory in a helpful way. So does this seem like a reasonable idea, or do people just want to talk in the larger group? Do people want to break out into smaller groups, or just talk everyone together? Okay, everyone who wants to break out, vote yes. Okay, only very few people are voting. Indifferent, okay. Okay, let's do a quick breakout and I'll bring you back in a few minutes. Breakout rooms. How do I do this? Breakout. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. That might help me. Okay. Everyone's in the room. Go for it. So maybe spend some time trying to think about this in your group, and then we can all come back together and touch base, and any great ideas you can share with the whole group.
Hello. Hello. Um,
For the people who aren't in rooms, do you want me to assign you to a room?
I'm in the room right now.
Okay.
I have a question. So, Professor Renate,
Alex, it's a private question. Let's talk about it afterwards.
wait, I thought the class is over.
Not yet. We're just doing breakout rooms to discuss some ideas, and then we're going to come back.
Where's the breakout rooms? We need a breakout room.
Yeah, I'll assign you to a breakout room.
I think some of us were in breakout rooms, but then we couldn't really find anything to discuss, so we kind of just came back.
Oh, okay. Well, people can come back if they want. So how about I say, why don't people come back when they are ready? Or should I just bring everyone back? I guess I'll bring everyone back because we don't have that much time. Closing. Okay, great. Is everyone back in the main room? Yes, no, everyone's back?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great. So I would love to hear, I mean, this wasn't a lot of time. I was really hoping to have a little bit more time to do this. So if there's enough people want to actually have this be an in-class activity, we can try to, plan for some time in the first class after spring break for this. Let me know by email or on Piazza that you would really like to do this. And if enough people say that they would, I'll try to plan something around this. So yeah, just let me know. But I think basically, yeah, I'd love to hear from you. So anyone who wants to share something, let me know. Or if you think that this was just too little time and we should dedicate a much larger class to this, then we can do that as well. Tomas?
Hey, I wanted to kind of give a summary of what we talked about. So we kind of brainstormed like main categories. We thought about supply chains, travel, quarantining and airports, and then how we could apply optimization to each of those. The one that we kind of got some quantitative notes on were airports. Which ones should be open relative to like maybe the population that it serves, how far it is from other airports, the flight zones that it has, because we want to allow travel, but we want to minimize like the spread of the disease. And then for quarantining, the days, and then we kind of went on a tangent of like how to quantify whether a job is important or not. And that's difficult. You could like kind of classify it and give weights to the different classifications maybe. But yeah, that is where we started.
Please write down your ideas. I'd like to, be able to compile these because I think these are good ideas.
Thank you. I will do.
Drew?
Yeah, so I think one of the things our group talked about is you can think about how to distribute testing kits among different areas. So you could think of those areas as either states or even like further down in granularity to maybe cities. And there's like a lot of interesting questions on what kind of objective do you pick to maximize here and what kind of constraints you put. And so I think one of the things we talked about is in terms of constraints, you might use the constraints to enforce some kind of like notion of fairness, because if your objective is trying to maybe like you want to allocate more kids towards areas that have a lot higher number of cases, then you might end up with an optimum where you're just going to dump all the kits into the city that has the highest number of cases or likely highest number of cases. And so you can use the constraints to do things like say, okay, each city or each area needs to have some minimum number of kits provided. Maybe you have some nonlinear constraints, like you subject like the difference between the maximum number of kits you allocate to any one city and the minimum number of kits you allocate to any one city has to be less than or equal to some amount. And then you probably need to have some idea of how these cases are distributed, or like some notion of like some model of like how likely certain areas have incidences of cases in order to write an objective which would like make sure to allocate kits by favoring those cities and giving more kits towards those areas instead of like giving a lot of kits to areas which have very low likelihood number of cases.
Yeah, that's a really interesting problem. I had never thought of that. Anyone else want to share their idea with the larger group? Anika?
Okay, so my group talked a little bit about group testing, because if you consider people in a household, so several cases have come out where maybe a father is tested positive and then they test every single person in the household, they all have the virus. So if we do a kind of group testing or a batch testing of a small community, so that would bring a lesser amount of tests needed, and we would kind of be able to optimize that somehow. But that looks like a viable way to reduce testing. Yeah.
That's a super interesting idea. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Ved?
Yeah, just like not something that my group discussed in particular, but something that sort of came to mind from Drew's discussion is that I think it's also important to allocate resources to low-income communities in particular, because let's say there's like a high amount of cases in like a relatively wealthier community, those people might be able to go and get tested on their own. But if there's a lot of cases in a low-income community, those people can't really afford to go get those tests on their own. So I think also like making sure that when you're, setting up your constraints, you somehow manage to incorporate that factor as well.
That's true. That's true. Jay?
Yeah, so kind of along the similar lines to Drew, we were thinking more of these motive factories related to manufacturing plants for respirators, and how I think the current federal administration is sending out a ship to New York or something for more hospital beds, right? So thinking like ways to even flatten the curve and to optimize the manufacturing and delivery of these like respirators and hospital beds and all these things, so that we can properly like that there isn't like a certain like an influx of patients at any given time, and I guess you can model that in terms of the objective too.
You want to have a constraint on the total number of like your total number of ventilators and total number of is a constraint, and you want to kind of it's like a resource allocation kind
Yeah, exactly.
Of types. Yeah. Yeah. Christopher?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, like, there's been talk about how, you know, the airline industry in particular, like, deserves a bailout more than, you know, other industries. And a lot of the time people point to the fact that it kind of enables other, you know, types of economic activity going on. So I was wondering if there's a way of looking at it more like quantitatively, and seeing like which industries have, as like a vague term, like the greatest impact like on the most people, and then doing resource allocation that way. So like targeting
Some
your
kind
subsidies to a specific.
interconnectivity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And
also,
trying to, yeah, I imagine, I wonder if this is, I wonder if the impact, I mean, someone else also brought up this importance of a job idea, and
yeah.
like, can you somehow quantify the downstream effects of one industry on another? Maybe economists have done this. I just don't know, actually.
Yeah. And I wonder if like similarly you can think of like different industries as being more at risk. Like some types of industries have smaller cash flows. So they're, I think, very similar to like the agents in the model that you were showing us. Like they're more susceptible to shocks versus other types of industries. So I wonder if you could maybe prioritize like, yeah, small businesses or small restaurants, for example, over other ones to make sure that they don't go bankrupt in this time. Yeah.
Yeah, anyone else? I know we're a little bit over time. Edward? Edward?
Oh, hello. Like one idea that I have was like, for example, because like there's a lot of limited tests, we could even think of probably organizing the population as a network, and we could possibly like figure out a way to be able to like point test each individual, and have, rather than treating each individual as an individual, we could try to have them become an approximation of a certain area of a network. That way we can try and better gauge on of how many people are actually infected with coronavirus.
Yeah, I think you cut out a little bit there, so I'm not sure I fully heard you.
Like like we can represent a population as a network that changes over time, and if we understand like for example, a person who interacts with a lot of people, like for example EMT, a nurse, we can have them. We can
like a
test them
hubs and nodes model, or yeah.
Oh yeah, is that what it's called?
Well, it's I think there's a hubs and something model that's used in search algorithms. But hubs and authorities, sorry, yeah, hubs and authorities model. But this would be, I guess you have like the degree of a node matters, right? In a graph.
Yeah.
I think about a graph, you have high degree nodes and you have low degree nodes. In the context of advertising, these people are thought of as influencers. In graph theoretic language. So yeah, something along those lines I think would definitely be interesting. I know we're super over time, so I want to end the official lecture time. I'd be happy to I'm happy to stay online and just talk a little bit more. I personally think it would be really interesting if we could come up with some ideas and, you know, have some simple models for things that could, you know, simple optimization problems that can actually make an impact in the short term. I think it would be a pretty impactful thing for an optimization class to do. And if a lot of people think that they're interested in doing something like this, just somehow find a way to let me know, and we can try to actually have a full class session dedicated to this if people want, because I think today I wanted to have at least an hour for this and we got 15 minutes. So let me know, make sure you document your ideas. I'm going to stop the official recording and the official class, but I'll be online for just a little bit longer in case people would like to talk more. Okay, stopping the recording. Thank you, everyone.